I want to welcome everyone this fine Saturday morning to the Utah Poetry Festival. This is the event Poetry as Survival, which will be moderated by Laura Stott. I'm Lisa Bickmore, the Poet Laureate of Utah. This festival began as an initiative of my predecessor, Paisley Reckdahl, during her tenure as Poet Laureate of the state. I'm very proud to be able to continue it. This festival would not be possible without the support, both logistical and financial, of Utah Humanities and the Division of Arts and Museums. Today, Emily Grubby is facilitating the Zoom. Thank you, Emily. Now, as you know, the institutions that support and promote the arts and the humanities in our state and nationally are under severe strain and attack. So I urge you, as a citizen and a lover and supporter of the literary and other arts, to contact your elected officials to tell them why experiences like this are important to you. I also want to thank Nano Taggart and Laura Stott, Maureen Clark, and Melissa Salguero for their work in planning this festival. The lively panels that happened today came about through their efforts, intelligence, and invention. A few housekeeping details. You, as participants, your video and microphone are muted for this webinar. You will be able to ask questions of our panelists, and you can do this by posting your questions in the Q&A. We'll try to save a little time at the end for panelists to answer questions. Please check out the virtual book fair and reading room at the festival website. Books and other materials by all of our participants are available there for you to peruse and purchase. And finally, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for being a vital part of the literary ecosystem of the state by making time for and showing up for poetry. Let me introduce our moderator. Laura Stott is the author of 3 collections of poetry, most recently, The Bear's Mouth from Lynx House Press. Her poems have also been published or are forthcoming in journals such as Bellingham Review, The Rupture, Barrow Street, Briarcliff Review, and other fine venues. She holds an MFA from Eastern Washington University and is an instructor of English at Weber State University. She lives with her husband and daughters in northern Utah. Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa, for that introduction and for this opportunity, and for all of our panelists for agreeing to talk about poetry and survival today. When we were planning, this was a topic that I immediately was drawn to. It's something I've been thinking about all semester with my teaching, because I feel like it's definitely been how I've been surviving the last few months. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to just introduce all 3 of our panelists, and then we'll go from there. So first, we have Isaac Tim with us today. Isaac graduated from Utah State University with bachelor degrees in history and creative writing. He lives in Logan with his wife Naomi and cats Anne and Dante. He was raised in Kalail, Utah, in the shadow of the Deep Creek Mountains, a remote range in the western desert on the Nevada border. He was born with Besker's muscular dystrophy, a degenerative genetic muscle disease, and his poems are featured in the Helican West anthology 10-Year Celebration of Featured Readers and Sugar House Review. And then we also have Dana Henry Martin, pronouns she, they, any. She is a poet, medical writer, a health and mental health advocate whose work has appeared in the Adroit Journal, Barrow Street, Shannon Review, Cider Press Review, Fence, Frig, Mad in America, Meat for Tea, Muzzle, New Letters, Stirring, One Art, Swim, Willow Springs, and other journals under the names Dana Henry Martin, Dana Guthrie Martin, and M. Rose Henry. Their essay, Impossible Histories Voicing Traumas in Poetry, was published by Flapper Press earlier this year. Their chapbooks include No Sea Here from Moon and the Rye Press, which is forthcoming, and Toward What is Awful, Yes, Yes Books, and In the Space Where I Was, Hyacinth Girl Press, and The Spare Room, Blood Pudding Press. Their full-length collection, Crude, About Growing Up in Oklahoma, is in progress. Martin weaves birds and hangs out with the cows who live next to the cemetery in Tokerville, Utah. And then we also have Dr. Tacy M. Atcity. who is of the Dene tribe, and her clans are as follows. She is Sleep Rock people and born for the Tangle people. Her maternal grandfather is from the Water Edge people, and her paternal grandfather is yucca fruit strung out in a line people from Cove, Arizona. She is the winner of the Wisconsin Brittingham Prize for Poetry and is a recipient of the Lewis Owens Award, the Truman Capote Creative Writing Fellowship, the Corson Browning Poetry Prize, Morning Star Creative Writing Award, and the Philip Freund Prize. She holds bachelor's degrees from Brigham Young University and the Institute of American Indian Arts, an MFA in creative writing from Cornell University, and a PhD in creative writing poetry from Florida State University. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Epoch, Poetry Magazine, Kenyon Review Online, Prairie Schooner, Swamp Pink, Literary Hub, New Poets of Native Nations, Leavings, and other publications. Her first book is Rain Scald from University of New Mexico Press, and her second book is At Risk from University of Wisconsin Press, came out in 2023. She is a member of the board of directors for Light Scatter Press and a member of the advisory council for Brigham Young University's Charles Redd Center for Western Studies. And she's an assistant professor of creative writing at Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin, where she lives with her husband and their puppy, Telpico. So I'm so excited to hear from all three of these poets. And would really love for us to begin by hearing each one of them read us a poem. So maybe we can start in the order that I introduced you. Isaac, would you mind going first, and then Dana and Tacey?
Okay, am I on?
Your camera is off, but we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know why the camera went off. All right. Erase and adore me. The bottle is our generational helper. A gulp of hot medicine to keep the voices away, the doubts, the loneliness. She just takes everything, everyone away. The bottle forgets poverty, 10-hour days, dust so small and sharp that it cuts decades out of lungs. The bottle smooths the edges of war, lowers the volume of warplanes, engines, anti-aircraft, sailors burning in water. Liquid the hue of a wolf's eye, floats ice that glitters, oh, sink into that center of that eye, cool, dark silence. Let me wrap her shadows around my body, a warm cocoon of arms. Sometimes the bottle wakes you hard, but she is dependable. Put her to your lips and fire, 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 burn the ghosts away.
Thank you, Isaac. That was beautiful. Thank you. Your camera's back on.
I don't know. I went over to tap to unmute.
Yeah.
Weird. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we can see you. Thank you. That was beautiful. Dana?
What I'm writing for. I'm writing for money and fame. I mean, I'm writing for honey and shame. I'm writing because there's a bee in my mind and another and another. My writing is their tree. It's the roots in this game called life. My writing rhymes with sane and with cane, if we won't want to go back to sugary sweetness or the snap of pain. I'm writing for more bees, enough to make this poem buzz like the psych ward just before evening meds are passed out and everyone laughs and draws rainbows with broken crayons. One woman pours coffee up and down the halls to keep evil away. She's from Denver, but talks with a Russian accent because she's a spy today. I'm writing for her and her fingers wet with coffee, the one she presses to my forehead in prayer. That's what I'm writing for, who I'm writing toward. The end.
Thank you so much. So beautiful.
Rain Scald. When standing in rain for so long, you no longer hear or feel it falling. You believe it's stopped. Step away. Look to your skin. Muck itch. It's a shame your hands have gone bald from fungus. Taking you to what's beneath scab. To one of those nights when you know your gums will bleed. To say it's been a while or it has to do with wrist mange is to say rot comes so easily now. Skin weep, lapse, step through the whole black of your home and still know damp, know exactly when to bend your finger for the light switch. So familiar in a bod, shame, your hands have gone haywire, taking you to what's beneath rust, ranges they've grazed, a time when you're combed through, when you know your knuckles and all that rain has swallowed.
Wow. Thank you to all three of you. That was just beautiful. So to jump into our discussion, I years ago when I heard Ellen Bass read, a poet that I love and admire, I remember her distinctly saying that without poetry she would be in despair, and that it was her way of finding joy. And I wondered if each of you could talk about how does poetry help you survive, and maybe what are your unique takes on this subject? And we don't have to necessarily go in any order if anyone wants to jump in, but
Yeah, I'll start. So I think for me, poetry has been a means of survival in terms of healing, right? Because we have, you called it a tool of survival, and paired with other tools, like faith or, service or other things. Poetry for me has been part of that, especially with trying to process the things that we're going through, whether it's an experience, a personal experience or a relationship experience or relationship with the land, which was, a poem that I had just read, and getting to a new area and land, or whether it's, relationship with a virus, which I was trying to decide, like, oh, maybe the pandemic, I'll read about the pandemic. But it's always, for me, poetry has been a means of processing and healing. Um, and so I see that as part of the survival, right? And so a lot of what I write is often with Rain Scald especially, and maybe my second book, At Rest, and maybe my third, maybe all of my work, right, to an extent is me going to poetry to with my own writing, right, to process things, but also looking to poetry, other poets' work, and finding such moments of relief, moments of empathy, that remind me that, right, there are other people out there that feel the same way that I do, and that's always been really helpful.
I can go. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is that when surviving isn't just about surviving stress or trauma, But in my case, it has a lot to do with that. And one thing that happens when we're very stressed or experience a trauma or a set of traumas is that our hippocampus doesn't timestamp our memories, which is one of the reasons things can feel like they're ever present or ongoing. And I recognize that when I write poetry, it's like an external, like apparatus almost surrounding me and doing what my brain, which is typically hypervigilant, hyper alert, what my brain isn't as good at doing because of the traumas that I've experienced. So I think about it, it's not very sexy, but I think about it as almost like an assistive technology that I'm using. I love poetry. I'm very romantic about it too, but it serves a purpose. Like, I'm dyslexic and having a keyboard helps me communicate. I need reading glasses, so I can't see very well up close, so reading glasses help me. I think poetry serves this very practical function because I can look at a poem. I'm kind of doing something by putting it into language, like Gregory Orr talks about. It kind of gets it out of the body in a certain way and changes our experience of the experience. But I also can go back and look at my work and say, oh yeah, that happened X number of years ago. So I'm kind of getting a feedback loop with my brain that I might not have otherwise.
Can you hear me? Am I on? Okay. I started writing late poetry when I was 35. I've always wanted to write, and I wrote mostly essays about nature. And there was issues of violence and poverty and alcoholism that for some reason I couldn't put into fiction. But I took a class that introduced poetry, the writing of nature poetry, and suddenly I had a place to put that emotion down that made sense, that made it manageable. And the second thing is I'd read my poems amongst people, and I made a connection to them that I wasn't alone. This person with learning disabilities and body dysmorphia. I thought that these things were like mine to deal with alone. I have to say, intellectually, I know that wasn't true, but like emotionally, that's what it felt like. So when it got poetry, I was able to unblock that and be able to make a connection. Yeah.
I'm just gonna kind of dovetail onto I love what you said, Isaac. Poetry is we're able to say things and write things in poetry that I feel like we're not able to in other genres, and hide things as well, right? Not to, not to be opaque for opacity's sake, but to really sort of craft our poems in a way that the reader has to dig for them, but in a way that we feel like would be very rewarding when they do find those things. And also, because poetry is such a beautiful, tight form, right? That we're just, I don't know. I find it really lovely what you were saying in terms of like I can say things in poetry that I can't say in other genres. So I'll just leave it there. But yeah.
I would add, is if there's time, that I also feel like kind of along the same lines that I can bring my whole self to a poem, including my sub-personalities. Not that poetry is therapy, I don't see it that way, but I do feel like there's a way that it is safe for me to delve into sub-personalities, that were part of my trauma, or to read a poem that puts me in that kind of state. that I can't like walk around town doing that. It's become a very safe space for me to become, to continue becoming as I write and in the act of reading and writing poetry.
I really like that. I also keep thinking about what you said, Dana, about poetry kind of taking you outside of your own body. Um, and I think that's so interesting. I know that like I had like just in my poetic practice, like having written through moments of grief, that's probably how I would describe it, is sort of taking myself outside for a moment and being able to look at it in a different way. And I guess in a way I want to segue to our next question, but having done that and written through grief and processed and used poetry as a way for me to get through trauma, or to talk about it. I kind of had an aha moment this semester. I was teaching a 1 credit hour course on odes, poems of celebration. And I was like, oh, this is how you do it too. It's not just writing about the difficult things, but through celebration. And there's that Rilke quote, but those dark, deadly, devastating ways, how do you bear them, suffer them, I praise. And so somehow it felt like this revelation, and kind of a surprise to me, although somehow it shouldn't have been that. And so I guess I kind of wondered if all of you had encountered in your life, in your poetry writing, or reading, just something that was a surprise to you and how poetry helps you. Like, any thoughts there?
I when I was at the university, we talked about persona poem.
Hmm.
One of my professors, Shannon Balaam, who is one of the professors up here at USU, she wrote a series of Little Red Riding Hood poems about, and I didn't think I could do that, but when dealing with issues of violence and body dysmorphia, I didn't feel like I was really being honest until I was able to take the persona of Caliban from The Tempest, that anger, that rage from that character. I was able to shield myself from the uncomfortable things, but also, through the knowledge that people have of that character, they knew of that rage and also that body dysmorphia. So through the character of Caliban, I discovered that I could talk about subjects that before had been very, very difficult to speak on or write about.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I like that, like thinking about the persona uh and coming at it from a different angle. Yeah, thank you.
One of the ways that I find poetry helpful and sort of delightful in a way is when I'm reading poetry and I find a poem that kind of speaks to me in the moment. And I remember I was going through a hard time, and in um, I had a friend of mine from my MFA workshop, and he sent me a card. I think it was a thank you card, but he put a poem in it, and it was the poem "How to See a Deer" by Philip Booth, and it had this line in there that was like, "You've learned now to wait. You've learned to wait without waiting." And that's what I felt like I was doing. Like I just felt like I wasn't even enduring. Like I was just it just that line just hit me so hard. And I remember reading the card, and I think I was like in my truck, and I just started like burst out crying. I was like, oh. and that moment, that I mentioned earlier, right? Those moments of empathy when you know that there is someone else right out there that is feeling what you're feeling and knows exactly how that feels. It's such a moment of like great connection, I think, to not only the poet, but like in humanity in general. And with my own work, that's something that I strive to do is to say that, regardless of who I am and what my background is and what I believe and where I come from, that I'm human and I feel, just the way that everybody feels.
Yeah.
I would add to that while poetry helps me see my own psyche and mind, impulses and needs more clearly, there's something else that starts to come into view, which is like a collective consciousness, the shared humanity, the impulses that kind of run through everything and that are longer than a single human lifespan. They're like an earth span. They're much bigger than an individual, but we're all part of it. And I don't mean that in any kind of hokey way. Um, I just feel like there's something approaching mythical, approaching archetypal that can help us contextualize ourselves within a bigger picture, and that leads to the kind of connection that you all are talking about as well. Um, Kind of feels like, and reading a poem like that, where you feel like, for me, it's joyful to read a poem where someone else is expressing something that I feel, but also when someone else is expressing something like I've never thought about it that way before, but holy cow, like that's totally right on. It's almost like I feel like my body does a little game of Tetris inside of myself, like everything kind of lines up, and clicks into place, even for just a few moments. And that is such a powerful experience.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I was just at AWP, the Associated Writers and Writing Programs Conference in LA, and I picked up Arthur Z's newest book at Canyon Press booth. And the first poem, I was just like, ah, like every line in that first poem was just so amazing, just written so beautifully and just orchestrated in a way that like I've never, I've never thought that words could be put together. And it was, yeah, it was really wonderful. And I also think of like one of my favorite poems is A Blessing by James Wright. And that, he's so great at like those last lines, suddenly I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom, right? Like, oh wow, like how in the world did he come up with that, And there are other moments, like you said, Dana, and in poetry when it sort of just right enlivens my soul and just kind of, for somebody to write something so gorgeous in a way that just kind of wakes up my soul in a way is kind of, it's really wonderful.
I'm loving hearing these experiences with different poems and poets, and I'm remembering like once where we used to live in California, we moved away, and then we were going back to visit and drove straight to the ocean. And when we got there, I immediately said, I gotta read you this Joy Harjo poem to my husband. And I got about halfway through the poem and I just started sobbing. Like I couldn't even finish it because it just broke something open inside of me. And I would I feel like this is a good time. Like if any of you want to share books or poets that you love that you would recommend that our audience read or listen to, or anyone want to share some of those?
Well, I'm a big fan of Emily Dickinson. She is the first poet I encountered at a very bad time in my life.
Mm.
I was 16 and I was beaten and thrown out of a car. And the nearest place to get help was my high school. So I had to walk into the high school with my shirt torn open, bleeding, bloody, and I had to stand in the library while the teachers called my parents and had to take care of me with, first aid. And there was a bunch of books on the table, and one of them was a primer of poetry. And I flipped it open, and to the poem, "I am nobody, are you nobody too?" And I remember reading it over again and getting a bloody thumbprint on the book that this person, different sex, hundreds of years, well, maybe a 100 years before me, had wrote this poem of feeling like nothing. And I was like, okay, makes sense. I'm there right now, lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story. That her poem was there right at that moment.
I'll share an anecdote that's similar to that. It's not my own personal experience, but it was shared with me by one of my classmates at Cornell when I was doing my MFA there. He was a PhD student. I can't remember exactly, maybe sociology program. He was a White Mountain Apache, and I think he was a tribe from Mexico, and I can't remember what the tribal name was. But we were part of the Indigenous Graduate Student Association, and we had talked about inviting a poet to come to Cornell, a native poet, and he said, "Oh, can we invite Adrian Lewis?" And who since passed on, but and I said, "Sure." So I said, "Would you be willing to introduce him?" And I think he had to be out of the country during that time, so he wrote an introduction for me to read. But he shared with me, much like Isaac's story, I think, he had been, he dropped out of high school. I think he was on drinking and drugs and drinking. He was having a really hard time and was at a very, very low point in his life. And he was actually getting ready to kill himself. And he sauntered into this library, and there was a literary magazine there, and he flipped open the book, and there was Adrian Lewis's poem, "This is the time of grasshoppers, and all that I see is dying." And it's a poem written to Adrian Lewis's wife, Colleen, and it's a very somber poem because she's got cancer, but it hit my classmate. It like really touched him in a way that woke him up, and I feel like it's that empathy again, right? Like it's just that, oh, like he said, "I didn't have a calling, but I had a want and a willing, like I could feel what he was feeling." And it was enough to have him look him up, and he sent Adrian Lewis an email, and he was really surprised that Adrian Lewis responded. And that for him was just like, it was kind of all uphill from there, that he felt, like he had some self-worth, that a poet would respond, that these were the words of a native person like him, who was feeling the way that he was feeling and going through similar things. And then the story gets better from there, right? Like he was a PhD candidate at Cornell University, some years later, and had a wife and kids. Um and so I think that's, like Isaac was saying, that's one of the really wonderful, beautiful things that poetry is able to do for us as people, right? Not just as poets, but as people.
I don't have individual poems. I mean, I do, but that's not what I prepared. I have some names, and I was trying to put this in the chat, but I can't copy into the chat. So I might just put it on my Facebook page later. One of them, these are alphabetical. is Elliot Cardinal, who is a poet and a musician and composer. So he kind of brings all of that to his work about survival. He's multimodal and extremely interesting as a writer and musician. Another is John Guzlowski, which some people have, I'm sure, are familiar with his work. He's writes extensively about all kinds of things, but a lot of work about his parents' experiences during the Holocaust. Another one is Luke Johnson, whose work is a kind of tender gutting, if I had to summarize it. Just an incredible, incredible collection. Quiver is his first collection. Rita Billy Masilo, who is from Lesotho in Southern Africa. He's living in France now, but he writes about his personal family and community experiences and global traumas incredibly beautifully. Anthony Robinson, who writes about what's broken in the world and in our country so beautifully and with such detail. It is like somebody creating a somewhat surreal painting on the head of a pen. And Virginia Chase Sutton, for all kinds of things, including the fact that every sentence she writes is brilliant. But she also has a collection about her stay at a psychiatric hospital that is brave, bold, and brilliant.
That's an amazing list. I was writing down as you were going. Thank you for sharing.
If I can figure out how to paste this, I will, but I can't type all that,
Yeah.
competently.
If you wanted to share your screen, we could probably do that. I don't know if you'd feel comfortable.
No, that'll freak me out.
Okay. I get it.
I am not an advanced user of Zoom.
Okay. Okay. Any other poets that anyone wants to recommend?
Derek
I-
Walcott.
You said Derek Walcott?
Yeah. Very. He's a Caribbean poet from Trinidad and Tobago. And I was introduced to him in a class, and I just like how he tells stories and how he deals with, the issues that, his feelings about religion. I like those as much as I kind of feel he came from a deep Catholic background and I came from a deep Mormon background, and how you feel maybe isolated because you kind of have ambivalence for that religion, that you don't feel like the answers it's giving you is it's giving everyone else these answers but not you. And I think Derek Walcott deals with that very well, about questioning what he truly believes, um, and what it's like to be a mixed race. When he was talking about the Bush Wars in Africa in the 70s, where he's both English and from West African descent. How do you square with those two as they're killing each other? How do you deal with colonialism plus getting educated at Oxford? Those were the kind of dichotomy he was in.
Yeah, I'll add to the list Bridget Pagine Kelly, who just especially the book Song and the poem Song is really wonderful and interesting and sort of weird and crazy, but very beautiful. Um, Gerard Manley Hopkins, right? Some of his sonnets are really wonderful. And then John Keats comes to mind, right? The Romantics. John Keats, he was 24 when he passed away. And so he was going through, was it tuberculosis he had? I can't remember what it was. But, to be 24 and to be living in a sort of like right next to the woman you want to love, but then you can't love her because you don't want to get her sick and kill her too. Right? Like his whole last like year or two of life, he knew he was dying and he knew he couldn't love the woman that he loved. And yet he wrote the odes, right? You were talking about that, Laura, like looking to the odes, like in those moments for poetry. So like Ode to a Grecian Urn, Ode to Nightingale, Ode to Autumn, right? He was in the autumn of his life. He was like right there at the step of winter, and still he wrote those gorgeous odes. And so yeah, I would say John Keats.
Thank you. Uh, a poet, just as you guys were talking, I just have to throw another name out there, but Ross Gay has been a poet that I've been reading a lot lately, and it's just been bringing me a lot of delight. Okay. So this wasn't a question I had prior for our panelists, so my apologies, but I just as we were talking, I was just thinking about um if there is someone who is brand new to poetry and feels intimidated, like, do you have any advice for like trying what you're talking about?
Oh, what do you mean by trying what we're
Oh, I
talking
guess
about?
like,
You mean writing?
yeah, just writing a
Okay.
poem. Yeah.
When you're writing about trauma, just don't write to an audience. Don't think about reading it. You don't have to. There's no one telling you that you have to read it out loud. So just sit down and start writing it. And if it's not ready for public consumption, that's not why you're writing it. It's you can write for yourself, and that's completely okay. I mean, that's why Emily Dickinson didn't write for anybody; she wrote for herself. And at different parts of your life, that just because you write it doesn't mean you have to share it. So just don't be frightened that that you'll be exposed. There's nothing saying if you don't feel like sharing that, you don't have to. There's no laws that tells you that you have to share your trauma poetry. But just writing it is it worked for me, just writing it.
For me, I would say that when I first started writing poetry, like I loved it a lot more than I could actually do it. That might still be the case. But it was my first formal writing class that I took in college when I finally worked up the courage to try to study poetry. And I just didn't know what I was doing at all until I wrote an imitation poem that was assigned by the class. And that practice of being able to be in someone else's framework, it's a kind of constraint, but it's also teaching you about rhythm and sound and how a poem moves and the big, changes that can happen within a poem. And you can use that skeleton to flesh out your own poems. Strangely Halloween metaphor. I didn't mean to go there, but I found that really helped me break through and not having to worry about like, what is a poem and should it rhyme or, what should the rhythm of it be? How long should it be? Just having sort of the hand guiding me of the poem I was imitating, then allowed those sub-personalities to come forward and those other voices and those experiences and my mother's experience in particular, in a way that felt safe and it was rewarding and it was deeply instructive.
Yeah, I would also say reading. Um, Reading is very important to the writing process. I think sometimes, in my life, I've felt like, oh, I don't need to read, or, I'll just get down and read. But I feel like the writing for me comes easier when I'm reading, right? Because I've got so much in my mind. I've got so much sort of to work with, right? Just thinking about language, thinking about how other poets have used language, thinking about diction and the word choice, like Dana was saying with rhythm and so just reading and we go out and buy a book of poetry, even if it's at your thrift store. And just I think that putting that, into your life, like making poetry a part of your life will enlighten your mind in a way that it's able to help you with your writing. Yeah.
Thank you. Just looking at the time, Lisa, are there any questions from our audience members?
There are not at the moment.
Okay. Well, if anybody has questions, is it the chat or the Q&A?
It's the Q&A. The
Okay.
Q&A is open.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if Isaac or Dana had prepared anything, but I'm interested in knowing what your thoughts were on Laura had a question about form and knowing if there are certain forms that you gravitate toward or think of when you're writing, survival poetry or.
Do you want to answer that first?
Oh, I didn't have any, I didn't think I had like a ton of great thoughts, but yeah, I mean, I think that it would depend on like the type of survival that I'm searching for. So, for example, like if I'm feeling like I'm just out of control, right? Like nothing's in my control,
Mm.
then I would need a form that has many constraints, right? Like a sonnet. I need, rhyme, meter, volta, the content, right? Like all of those things. I would need a poem that would help me feel like, okay, I can control these things, right? Um, Whereas if I'm feeling sort of cramped or tied or bound, like tied down in some way, whatever it is that I'm, going through, then a form with fewer constraints, like maybe only writing in syllabics or free verse, right? But other than that, like I didn't have too many thoughts other than that.
I like having some kind of constraint, any kind of constraint, because I think interesting things come forward when that happens. So like Salt Lake Community College, I think it's the Writing Center that's doing the 30 prompts, a prompt every day. I like to sit down and have a prompt like that because it might not be like, I might be like, whatever, like this is so, I would never write about this. But then when I do, it allows me to go places I would never have expected. I like inventing constraints, like this poem can only use these letters. This poem cannot have ascenders or descenders. Some of that ends up being really hard to do, but any kind of constraint to work against, invented form, traditional form, writing a poem after someone else, writing to a prompt, I think is all like really helpful. It's kind of like having a time signature, or a key that you're using for a piece.
I agree with prompts. Prompts are like a tool I use all the time. I can't get enough of them. And also with that, being around other poets, getting to know writing in structure is very hard for me. Most of my poems are free verse, just the rhythm of words I hear. but I wrote a sestina, which is you have to repeat the lines over and over again. And I was surprised how finding the right lines that would work, repeated all over again. And then at the end of it, you have to put the repetitious lines all together in one paragraph. I was surprised at what that paragraph was and how accurately it, covered something that I wasn't even thinking of writing about trying to catch up with my alcoholic brothers by drinking, and about, feeling that you're never going to die. But because writing in that form, it just kind of came out, and I never intended for it to come out, but that's what the form required of me. It just kind of unfolded it in a way that I really didn't think I was ready, but because putting into a form, I was ready. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first poem I wrote about very, very traumatic ongoing childhood experience was a pantoum. And I know people don't like pantoums. I know there's a whole group of folks out there that don't like the pantoum, but that repetition and what you're saying, like how the lines are coming back, and it's like got this eerie kind of quality because of the layering. Like in music, we don't play a note once and that's it, right? Like we have themes that come back in different ways, different volumes, different parts of the orchestra playing. I'm thinking about orchestral music, but could be any music. I think that there's something to those repeating forms, and especially for working out something where maybe we've been ruminating, right? It fits the form, something we've been living with in different ways in different parts of our life for years. It makes perfect sense that that would come out like that. And then even like Floor, that's the best thing. When the poem surprises the person writing it, that's incredible.
Laura, I have a couple of questions from the Q&A. Would you like me to ask them, or can
Oh.
you see them?
I figured out how to see them.
Okay.
Okay. So one of those, and I know we're short on time, so but we'll get through these. What are poems that immediately stand out to you as survival poems that intersect queer women's experiences with connectedness to the natural world? I don't know if anything's coming to mind. I am like, as soon as I read that, I thought of Meg Day. And I'm not thinking of a particular poem right now, but I'm going to recommend reading them.
Yeah, Mae Swenson also comes to mind. I think that would be a good poet. She was born in Logan, and then relocated to New York City for most of her life. But she was a queer poet, and I think had some ties, to land, natural world.
Any other answers?
What happened?
Yeah. You can keep thinking about it too. I'll ask our other question, and then if you have an answer for the other one, we can always go back to, because I know that's something you got to think a minute about. What is your response when you're feeling that your poetry is wanting in a particular way? Like when I don't feel my work as metaphorically vibrant as others.
Can you read that again?
Yes. What is your response when you are feeling that your poetry is wanting in a particular way? Like when I don't feel my work as metaphorically vibrant as others.
As other things we've written or other things other people have written? Are we comparing to ourselves or to other poets?
It sounds to me to other poets.
I don't know if I think that way, but I would say my response would be to write more. keep writing, keep reading,
Mhm.
keep pushing, and whatever's in that work, if it's something that I've just read that's blown me away, learn from that and don't imitate it, but try to figure out how it got that good. And then try always to be as good as the best thing you've ever written
Right,
or read. I mean, both written and read.
right. I think what helps is talking to other poets. Um, if you can, a writing group, a poetry group is really good when you can have other poets look at your work and you can experience other poets. I mean, that's more than like really their critiques a lot of ways is just hearing how they put things together different, how they create different metaphors. And even so reading poets that you can't necessarily, but reading poets, you can do that too. You can see how these poets put things together and you can mimic them. You can write against that. It's really about having some kind of communication between you and another poet, either a living or dead poet. Depends on how you can communicate with them.
Yeah, additionally, I would say, you know, I know it's easy to say, but not comparing yourself or your work to other poets, right? Because you are where you are, and that's okay, right? Yeah, that's where you are on your poetic journey, and just knowing that I think is enough. I think that when you can look at other people's work and be inspired, right, and be happy for them and not feel sorry for yourself or for your own work, but be happy for where you are. And like, Isaac and Dana are saying, like, keep writing, right? Keep moving forward. And as long as your own work is improving, little by little, I think that progression, that progress should be applauded. Um, and yeah, so I just will say that.
Okay. Thank you. I think that is a perfect place to end on. And I am just really grateful for this beautiful conversation and everyone's responses. So thank you so much.
Let me just say a couple words at the end here. I also just want to say that I was glad I could turn my camera off because I had to cry a little bit while I was listening to all of you. It was so beautiful and such a vibrant and rich conversation. Thank you so much. I want to encourage everyone to go find the books and the writing of these writers. I've posted it in the virtual book fair. You can look and see what they've written and find out more about them. And please register for any of the rest of the festival events, which you can find on the Poetry Festival website at utahpoetryfestival.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you so much.